Next up is Jan. Jan lives in Hamburg. He's helped organize quite a few conferences, been to quite a few. He taught me 2 months ago, he taught me to beatbox, gave me a little introduction on how it works. It was awesome. And today he's going to enlighten us some more about some musical stuff. And so please join me in giving Jan a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a massive honor to finally speak at EuRuKo, a conference that I absolutely adore. So this is great. Before I start, real quick, the advertisement block. I'm a co-founder of DebFu. We do automated dependency updates by sending you pull requests on the GitHubs, and some people really like us, and we brought t-shirts and stickers. So, yay. I'm going to be in the speaker lounge after this, after the pitches, so hit me up there. And also, Florian is somewhere in the audience, I guess, my co-founder, and speak to us. Okay, before I really start, a quick warning. Please don't try to understand the code examples. They're there more or less to show complexities and give you an idea of what's going on. And everything is online. Everything is on GitHub. There's a website called rubysynth.fun. I think there's a typo in there. That's nice to find that. To find that while giving the presentation. And you're going to find a lot more info than what I can do in 30 minutes on that website. So let's start with some music. Let's do something different. This is SonicPi. How many of you have played with SonicPi real quick? Okay, cool. Let's do some music. I could have live coded this, but I know myself, and in the first 5 minutes of a talk, I'm so nervous that my fingers are not really my fingers. And so I thought I better make a video of this. And for some reason, I was really awkward on the video as well. So this is going to take some time. I'm sorry about that. I mean, is this really me? Can I type? Did I do this before? Ever? I don't know. So yeah, you can write some code and it will produce some music, and this is really cool. SonicPi has been around for a couple of years. It's written by Sam Aaron, and it's a wonderful system to both learn coding and making music, and I really recommend it. If you haven't looked at it, go to sonicpi.net and play with it. And Sam Aaron has a Patreon. Finally, something that resembles music somewhat. Let's add another drum thing to it. I really should have faked this better. I should be typing here all the way. Look how amazing I am. Yeah, no. And now finally, let's add some effects for effects. Come on, you can do it. All right. Cool. So that was SonicPi, but we want to dig deeper because I want to show you how to make music with pure Ruby. SonicPi uses a lot of advanced technology under the hood that is not Ruby. And I'm going to use pure Ruby plus a thing called SOX. SOX is short for Sound Exchange, I think, and has been conceived by Lance Norskog and is now maintained by Chris Bagwell. It's been around since 1991, just out of interest. How many of you are born after 1991? Cool. Yeah, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife for audio file conversion. You can convert anything into anything, and it can deal very well with raw data. And so if you take this Ruby thing at the top, it's like the most simplest thing I could come up with to generate Ruby sound. sound in Ruby, sorry. And it generates a square wave, and it outputs it in binary format as like a little endian floating point 32 bits thing that we can then convert into something that your sound card can understand with the play command, which is part of the SOC seed. But we can also save it as a WAV file, which is the sound file format that stores raw sound data. And then we can play it in the browser. So let's do that. Be careful. It's not very nice, is it? But it's sound. It's something. It's something, right? Is it? OK, cool. So how does it work? I mean, how does it really work? What is sound? So essentially, sound is vibrating air molecules. So something starts moving air molecules around, and you got this wave that goes through it. And this is then detected by your ear. Please don't make me explain how your ear works, because that's really complicated. I don't know a lot about it, but it's complicated, and it's a wonderful mechanism that allows us to hear these sound waves. Now, we want to somehow turn electrical current into air movement, because our computer works with electrical current, right? For that, you need a loudspeaker. How does a loudspeaker work? Well, you have an electric magnet that moves a static magnet, and that static magnet is connected to a diaphragm or a membrane or something, and that pushes out the air in the rhythm that you give it with the electric current. And so you create air molecules, moving air molecules by electric current. Now, computers are digital, so we need to somehow convert digital data to electric current. And this is done by a digital to analog converter, or DAC. Please don't make me explain those as well, because they are complicated. Most modern things probably have tons of patents on them. I mean, the general principle is really simple, but it can get complicated in the real world. Now, if we talk about converting a digital signal to analog signal, there are a couple of challenges. If you look at this very scientific graph of a digital wave and an analog wave, you see that, can you see the pixels? You see that one has these steps and the other one doesn't. I mean, technically it has, but you know what I try to express with this. And so, yeah, digital data is always discrete in both time and values, and that is a problem, because electrical current usually is not, and the stuff that you're trying to do with it, like moving a loudspeaker, that would be kind of awkward. So there are a couple of things you need to know. The first one is about sampling frequency. So that means how often do you sample a signal in the digital domain. And there's this rule that you need at least double the sampling frequency to express a certain frequency. So this is called the Nyquist-Shannon theorem. Sampling theorem, and this is the reason, for example, why CDs use 44.1 kilohertz as a sampling rate, because if you have that, you're ending up at somewhere around 20 kilohertz, which is roughly the boundary for human hearing. So sounds higher than 20 kilohertz. I mean, I'm old. My range is probably much smaller, but like a normal human can hear up to 20 kilohertz of sound. So CDs will not work for dogs. Really important point. And the other thing is, like, you have only so many values in your sampling, and there's just a question of like having enough so that you don't actually hear what's going on. And enough is enough. If you use more bits per sample that you need to, you're just wasting space. Finally, let's get back to the Ruby synth thing. So this is, again, the code. It's really simple, and it produces a square wave. Again, not very beautiful. It produces a square wave at 440 hertz. Why 440 hertz? Because 440 hertz is the concert pitch. It's the A above the middle C. If you're a musician, this means something to you. If you've had some musical notation at school, it should mean something to you. I forgot all about these things and had to relearn them, but that's how it is. Now, The thing is that I'm going to talk about Western notation here. And I think this is kind of important to point out because other cultures and other regions in the world use completely different systems for notation. So everything I say here in the couple of next slides is going to be about Western notation and our own very Western way of looking at music. So this is this resembles a musical keyboard like on a piano. It has multiple octaves. An octave means that you're doubling the frequency. So if you're going from a low C to the next C, you're going to double the frequency of the tone. And it also means that you're going from across 12 keys. And these 12 keys are, the intervals between them are called halftones. And so you have 12 of them, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and so on. You could also call it C, D flat, D, E flat. I suck at this. And it's just a way of looking at the weird black keys. Sometimes you count them coming from the top, and sometimes you count them coming from the bottom. Actually getting to the frequencies apart from A, which is always defined as this 440 hertz and then doubling or halving it, is really complicated, and it's not well defined. It's mathematically complicated, but people will simplify. And this is the MIDI tuning. It's a formula where you can simply input a note number that is a number from 0 to 127, and a 0 is a very low C, a 60 is a middle C, and so 69 would be the concert pitch A. And the thing about this is that it is just one way of tuning the notes in between, and it doesn't really add up. It's weird. If you're interested in the details, look it up. It's weird. So again, a square wave at 440 hertz. Are you already bored by this? So this is a different way of displaying it. This is the frequency spectrum. And this is quite cool because it allows us to see the harmonic content of the sound that we're playing. And so, yeah, I know it sounds horrible. To turn this into something more beautiful, we need to sculpt the sound. And we're using something called subtractive synthesis for this. This is just one way of synthesizing sounds. And the idea of subtractive synthesis is a little bit like sculpting. Like if you have a big block of marble and you want to turn it into a mermaid or a discus thrower or something like that, you chisel away everything that doesn't look like a mermaid or a discus thrower. That's how people explain it usually to me. And so you can do the same thing with sound. So you start with high harmonic content and then you filter down. Like filter? Yeah. There are things that filter out certain parts of the spectrum. We are going to use a thing called a state variable filter. Now, the interesting thing about this block diagram is that you can turn it either into code or into electronic components. So you can build essentially the same filter out of electronic components or out of code, which is handy. So this is the electronic component. No, it's the code. So this is the code for a state variable filter. And the other cool thing about the state variable filter is that it generates multiple outputs at the same time. So you get different kind of filters. The first one is a low pass. This cuts away all the high frequency. That's, yeah, explaining it the wrong way around. And it sounds like our square wave then sounds like this. This is it's still horrible, but it's a bit nicer. It doesn't sound so harsh. The other way around, you could also use a high pass. That sounds bad. So yeah, that's not great. A band pass is the combination of both, so you end up with this small frequency band. Doesn't sound great either. And then you have a band reject notch filter. You only use this in special cases, so I won't show an example. But something is still wrong here. It doesn't sound musical. So what can we do about that? If you listen to this piano sound, it's so much nicer, right? And the reason for that is it kind of doesn't start so harsh. It ends really nicely and mellow, and there's this part in the beginning where it sounds more harsher, and then it mellows down as well. So there's some filtering obviously going on. Not real filtering, but you get the impact in the beginning, and then you only hear the strings in the end. So there's variance over time, and this is important. So we can do that in the digital domain with envelopes. Not these envelopes. but these envelopes. This is an attack, decay, sustain, release envelope, or short, ADSR. The cool thing about this is that it's sort of a compromise of having lots of control and having very few parameters. And yeah, so the time goes on and you just shape a certain parameter with it. This is how it looks like. This is terrible code. It's really inefficient, as I found out throughout the last few days. It takes a lot of time to calculate, but it tries to be super perfect with all the edge cases. And we can shape everything with this. Let's start with the volume. This is because that's going to be much nicer. We have a filtered down sound already, and we kind of modulate the volume with, or the amplitude with the envelope. This is much better. We could also modulate the filter frequency, and so start with something harsh in the beginning and then mellow it down, like the piano. So that sounds like something already. We could also modulate the pitch. This is a little bit weird. But it's used sometimes in certain instruments. You can actually do this by hand, and also it's really useful for generating drum sounds, as we're going to see. So I wanted, we now have a palette of things we can do to sound to generate synthesizer sounds, and you're going to hear them in the end. And this is now the section where I'm going to talk about drum sounds, because every good electronic music should have drum sounds. So let's start with the kick drum. The kick drum is like the biggest and most important part of any drum set, and it's a drum that is just a lot bigger than any other drum. And the way drum sounds are generated in the real world is you hit something with a stick, and then the whole thing vibrates. And this creates two different types of sound after each other. So you have that sharp impact in the beginning, and then you have the vibration of the whole thing that's gonna decay in the end. And so we can kind of emulate this by taking a sine wave as the oscillator, as the sound generator, and then we pitch it up like I showed you with the envelope, real quick in the beginning, and then pitch it down again, and then just let the sound fade out. And this is what it sounds like. This is not a great bass drum, but it is a decent bass drum, I would say. So the snare drum is a smaller drum. That means that if we want to use the same technique to emulate it, we would just pitch it up, because smaller things have higher tones. That's just how physics work, I guess. But the snare drum also has this interesting thing where there's the actual snares, which are steel wires, which are lying across one of the drum heads. And so if you hit it, they bounce around like crazy and create this noisy thing. So let's create something out of noise. So we take noise. White noise is really easy to generate. Rand is your friend. That rhymes. Cool. So you just generate a random number between -1 and 1, and you get white noise. And then you have to filter it down, because white noise also sounds horrible. And then you put, another amplitude envelope on it, and then you add the bass drum sound just pitched up a little bit. Yeah, it's a bit quiet. I should have made it louder. But it is sort of resembling a snare drum. Sort of. And the last thing I want to show you is a hi-hat, which is this weird thing. It's two cymbals, so these metal things, and you can move them up and down with a pedal, and it creates a very noisy, short sound. And the way you synthesize it is, again, you take white noise, and then you have a bandpass filter, because you only want like a small portion of a higher spectrum. And then you have two different amplitude envelopes. One is for the closed hi-hat, that is when the things are put together, and the other one is like if it's open and you hit it with a stick, it produces a longer sound. So they just differ a little bit. And that's a hi-hat, to me at least. And if we combine all of this together, whoa, what was that with my voice there? We have a drum beat. Okay, now, yeah. Wait, there's more. Okay, I'm almost in time, that's cool. So So now we want to turn all of these sounds that we've generated into music. And what I did with the drums there is I sequenced them. And for understanding how sequencing works, we need a couple of extra words we need to learn. So beats, bars, and notes, and other things. And everything I'm going to explain is in the context of the most simple measure you can think of. It's the 4/4 measure. And it's what almost every pop song is made of. It's what techno is usually made of. You can make music much more interesting by deviating from that, but to be able to explain it, I'll stick to that. And a 4/4 is nothing else but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. No, that's 3 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, that was a nice. Okay, so so 3/8 is a really interesting rhythm. So if you have a 4/4 measure, there's 4 beats in a bar. So a bar is essentially a quarter note. Yes, musicians count from 1. Yes, this is irritating to programmers. It throws me off so many times. And if you look at a bar is just like one measurement unit of music. You can have notes in different lengths in them. So you have a full note, which is essentially a bar long. Then you have a half note, a quarter note, an 1/8 note, and a 16th note. And the 16th note is sort of you can go 32th and 64th, but these, usually you're staying with 16th notes. And one of the reasons is that you could also call a 16th note a step. And the reason for that is that there are machines out there that are using a thing called a step sequencer. And this is one of the most famous drum machines ever. This is the Roland 808. And if you look at these colorful buttons at the bottom there, that's 16 of them. So you can program 1 bar of music with them, or of drums with them. And I guarantee you have heard this drum synthesizer. The other thing we need to talk about is tempo. Am I too fast? Yeah. So, I couldn't think of any good ship-related things, sorry. So tempo is usually measured in BPM, that's beats per minute, or in our case, quarter notes per minute. And if we know that, we can do some sequencer math. So if you're setting the BPM to 120, the computation gets really easy. So a beat length in seconds would be half a second. That's easy to calculate with. A bar length would be 2 seconds, and a 16th note would then be 1/8 of a second. Now, to turn this into something more concrete, we want to somehow organize our musical notes around something. And the way this is usually done is with so-called patterns. Patterns are collections of notes that you can then reuse. Think of them as like a method in a programming language, maybe. You can reuse that. And so a pattern is made out of notes, and then you can arrange the patterns into songs. And since this is Ableton Live, it's a software I sometimes use to make music, but the screenshot is a bit weird, so let's take a look at a simplification of that. So in the bottom, you have what is called a piano roll. The x-axis is time, and the y-axis is the pitch or the notes, and this is organized in like a piano keyboard thing. And so you can just you can paint the notes into a pattern. And then you can reuse that pattern on the top in the song structure, and you can repeat them, and you can stop them at some point and then restart them. And so this is something that is really easy to work with, and I want to do it in code, so let's build a DSL for that. I'm not going to show you the implementation, I'm just going to show you how I'm using it. So the first thing we want to do is drum patterns. And since I like step programming, I just use strings here to show the on and off notes. And this is a very typical techno beat. It has the snares on the 2s and the 4s and the kick drum on each one of them, and then the hi-hat on the 8s in between. And it's a very typical drum beat, heard 1,000 of times. For notes, it's a little bit more complicated because we want to be able to input notes at certain times, and there's more parameters, so something like an asterisk wouldn't be enough. And so we have something like a a note name, which is just the letter and the octave, and then we give it a length as well. And the P is just nil. I just alias that to nil because P stands for pause, and it was easier to type than nil. And you can also chain notes together with commas to create chords. Like chords are just collection of notes played together at the same time. And then we define all these patterns, and then we can turn them into songs. And it works a little bit like an Ableton Live, where you say, OK, this pattern starts at position 100, and it's repeated 4 times. And with that, you can actually build a song. And this is a very simple version of that. Yeah, so this is, yeah, whatever. Thank you. But still, something is missing here, and we're going to figure that out in the mixing stage, because we can fix it in the mix. And so, yeah, so if you look at any music studio, you've probably seen that in a documentary. If you've never been in a music studio, I don't think I've ever been in a proper music studio, you see these huge mixing desks. And what they are essentially a way to plug in all the instruments you have and mix them together. And so we can do that in software as well, of course. And the structure is a little bit like this. So you have all these, they are called channels, and every channel would be responsible for one instrument. So for example, or bass drum, or hi-hats, or a bass sound, or something like that. And then you can vary various parameters on these channels, and then they all get sent into the sum channel. And additionally, you have what is called send channels, so you can send slight amounts of your channel data into, like small amounts of your channel signal into the send channels and do interesting things with them. I'm gonna explain all of that later on. So per channel, we have volume, we have an equalizer, we have a compressor, and we have insert effects. That is like a typical thing that would happen in a mixing desk. What is an equalizer? An equalizer is essentially a set of filters that allow you to change the volume of different parts of the frequency spectrum. Why would you want that? Well, if you're mixing together lots of different sounds, you want to make sure that every sound has its own space in the frequency spectrum. Because for example, if you have a bass drum and a bass and a bassy kind of lead, and you mix all of that together, it's going to sound mushy real quick. And with an equalizer, you can try to separate these as much as possible. A compressor is an interesting thing. It's not about data rate reduction or anything. It means that you're compressing the dynamic range. And if you look at this curve, the x-axis is the input, the y-axis is the output. So louder signals are getting reduced in loudness. And then the tricky part is, so the whole signal gets quieter, and then you can boost it up again. And so suddenly everything is louder than before, which is weird because we made something quieter in the beginning. But that is how a compressor works. So it essentially compresses down the dynamic range and makes things louder. Insert effects can be anything. I'm doing 2 things here. The first one is a wave shaper. A wave shaper is a really simple thing. You have an input and you have an output, x-axis input, y-axis output, and you create these curves, these wave shaping curves, and they distort the input signal. And sometimes distortion is something we want, if we want to play an electric guitar, for example, or if we want to make our kind of weird small bass drum sounding a little bit bigger. And so this is a wave shaper, and I gave you some examples of how varying the A parameter here, which essentially like curves the curvature there, to make it sound more harsh. You can hear that it's like the signal starts to look a little bit weird, and it starts to crush a little bit. And the last one is chorus. Chorus is essentially a way of taking part of the signal, delaying it a tiny amount, and varying this delay, and then putting it together with the original. So it looks a little bit like this. So if you have a sawtooth wave, it would just like delay these against each other, and that creates interesting effects. I can't explain it. Let's listen to it. This is without, and that is with. Did you hear the difference? Cool. Stand effects. So send channels are there for effects that you want to have on all channels in parallel. So you can, from every channel, you can send something to it. Oh man, I'm running out of time. So a delay is an echo. This is the code. You've heard that before. A reverb is like a room sound. So this is a pretty good acoustic thing. The way you create this in software is you have lots of echoes, and then you use diffusers to mush them all together so that it sounds a little bit nicer. So you hear the room in that, right? Gonna skip that. And so for the last part, it's really inefficient. And so I pre-calculate this. And examples, no, song final. Go for it! There's a break coming up. Wait for it. I'm not done. Now I'm done. And it is, I'm embarrassed to say it's still the wrong URL. There's a dash in there, and I feel terrible about this. I'm sorry.
I will find it anyway. So many places to put a dash in there.
Thank you so much, Jan. I don't know about the rest of you, but I loved just sitting back and listening to the waves.
Thank you so much.